Hi everyone, I am your host, Peter Zablocki, and you're listening to History Shorts. I hope everyone's having a great day so far, and thank you for making this show a small part of that. If you'd like to help me out with a small gesture, please leave History Shorts a rating or a review, and click that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. For sources and books used as the basis for these episodes, how to advertise on a show, and other information such as a list of our upcoming guests on the Conversation series, or a link to our Patreon account where you can listen to exclusive episodes not heard here, please visit www.historyshortspodcast.com. You could always shoot me an email at peter@historyshortspodcast.com. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate podcast listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the globe, all in one place. Download Podcast Republic now and take your podcast experience to the next level. Having said all of that, in the winter of 1919-1920, as American psychology was breaking away from introspective experiments and toward a new creed of behaviorism, a flamboyant Johns Hopkins professor named John B. Watson decided to run one dramatic study that would, he hoped at least, prove that emotion itself could be manufactured in a laboratory. His rallying cry, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, and I'll guarantee to take any one at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select," echoed through lecture halls and popular magazines alike. The infant who would make or break Watson's claim was a chubby, dark-haired boy the researchers called Albert B. Here is the rest of that story.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Albert was 9 months old when Watson borrowed him from the Harriet Lane Home for Children, the pediatric wing attached to Johns Hopkins Hospital. The boy's mother, a wet nurse who worked on the ward, allowed her son to be paraded downstairs to a makeshift studio, a narrow table, a white sheet for a backdrop, and a hand-cranked movie camera, and a pile of curious objects: dog, rabbit, monkey, masks, cotton, smoldering newspaper. During baseline trials, the baby pawed each item placidly, flinching only when Watson's assistant, graduate student Rosalie Rainier, clanged a steel bar behind his head. The startle reflex to noise, Watson argued, was one of the few innate fears with which a baby entered the world. Everything else, he insisted, could be conditioned. 2 months later, with Albert now 11 months old and able to sit steadily, the conditioning began. Each time the child reached for a gentle white laboratory rat, Rainier smashed the steel bar with a hammer. Albert jerked, his lip trembled, and tears welled. After several pairings, the mere sight of the rat sent him scrambling, whimpering, and burying his head in the mat. In Watson's notebook, the once neutral rat had become a conditioned stimulus, the baby's anguish, a conditioned response. The moment was preserved on grainy film, the professor leaning in while the toddler was scared, fist balled, eyes darting to escape. Watson pressed further. He brought in a rabbit, a shaggy dog, a sealskin coat, and a cotton ball Santa Claus mask. Albert cried at each, even though no noise accompanied them. Thus, Watson proclaimed that fear could generalize across stimuli that shared texture and color. The finding dovetailed neatly with Ivan Pavlov's canine salivation curves, but provided for the first time a cinematic glimpse of human conditioning. Yet Watson later admitted that fear was neither strong nor lasting, and skeptics noted the laboratory failed to test whether the boy would fear all furry objects or only those thrust suddenly toward his face. Watson's triumph was short-lived. In 1920, news broke that he and Rainier, his student and co-author, were having an affair. Hopkins demanded his resignation, and within months, the father of behaviorism was reinventing himself on Madison Avenue as an advertising guru. Albert disappeared from the scientific record. Watson never ran the promised deconditioning sessions that might have shown whether fears could be untaught as easily as they were imposed. Instead, another young researcher, Mary Cover Jones, published the first successful case of systematic desensitization, or the Peter study, quietly correcting Watson's omission and earning herself later the title Mother of Behavior Therapy. For decades, introductory textbooks retold the little Albert tale as a clean-cut proof of learned phobia. But in 1979, historian psychologist Ben Harris combed the original paper and film frame by frame and concluded that Watson's evidence was interesting but uninterpretable. The experiment had no control group, one subject, poorly described procedures, and subjective measures of fear. The growing field of research ethics, galvanized by scandals such as the Tuskegee experiment, soon used little Albert as a cautionary parable. When the American Psychological Association adopted its formal code in 1973 and federal regulations issued the Belmont Report in 1979, Watson's basement exercise joined Harry Harlow's monkeys, Milgram's shock machine, and Zimbardo's mock prison on every list of studies that could never be approved today. One mystery, however, refused to fade. Who was Albert, and what happened to him? Beginning in the 1950s, psychologists swapped rumors that his mother had angrily whisked him away, that he'd grown into a man afflicted by a phobia of dogs, even that he died young. But records as to what became of him were few and far in between. Watson had used only the cryptic initials or Albert B. In an era before ethics committees required de-identification logs, the baby's identity seemed irretrievable. Harris' archival work located hospital rosters, but no conclusive match. And for another generation, little Albert remained psychology's most famous missing person. Then in 2009, psychologists Hull P. Beck and Sharman Levinson announced that they had cracked the case. Looking through census rolls, they settled on Douglas Meridi, born March 9, 1919, whose mother, Arvila Meridi, was indeed a wet nurse at Harriet Lane. Douglas' birthday fit Watson's notes. His physical resemblance to the film stills was striking, and hospital payroll ledgers showed Arvila working the very months that Watson filmed the study. But the discovery came with a bombshell. Douglas had been diagnosed with a congenital hydrocephalus and died at age 6. If Meridi was Albert, Watson's claim that the child was healthy and normal was most definitely false. A follow-up analysis in 2012 by Friedland, Beck, Goldie, and Irons compared still frames of the experiment to early 20th century neurology textbooks. They argued that Albert's sluggish eye tracking, hand-scooping grasps, and minimal facial affect all pointed to neurological impairment. Manifestations consistent with Douglas' medical file listing obstructive hydrocephalus, meningitis, and optic nerve atrophy. If true, Watson had not only frightened a baby, but exploited a disabled one, and then generalized the results to the broader population. The authors asked whether the dean of behaviorism had, knowingly or not, committed academic fraud. Yet the detective story was not over. In 2014, another trio, Powell, Digdon, and Harris, challenged the Meridi thesis, pointing out discrepancies in chin dimples, earlobes, growth charts, and, crucially, Albert's apparent ability to see objects across the table despite Meridi's recorded blindness. They nominated William Albert Barger, later Martin, born within a day of Douglas, and likewise attached to a hospital nurse. Barger lived until 2007, recalled by relatives as a gentle man who never much liked dogs. Because both candidates fit fragments of Watson's sparse description, scholars today concede that little Albert's true identity remains uncertain. A rare 100-year-old cold case at the intersection of genealogy and psychology. While academics debated fingerprints and hospital ledgers, popular psychology marched on. Lecture slides distilled the saga to a single moral: fears are learned, not born. Few mentioned that the rat phobia was never extinguished, that Albert reportedly played happily with wooden blocks the whole time, or that Watson's own film shows the boy tugging the rabbit's fur between sobs, a conflicted mix of attraction and alarm. Surveys of modern textbooks reveal repeated errors: dates, number of pairings, even the notion that Albert was cured by Mary Covert Jones, when in fact Peter, a different child, received that honor. Despite its flaws, the experiment left indelible marks. It cemented classical conditioning as a pillar of behaviorism, inspired the systematic desensitization techniques later refined by Joseph Wolpe, and foreshadowed today's exposure-based therapies for anxiety and PTSD. Today, federal regulations require risk minimization, parental consent, and the right to withdraw, and above all, a favorable risk-benefit ratio. The saga of Little Albert thus serves as a mirror reflecting how far psychological science has traveled, from opportunistic basement trials to multi-layered protections for even the smallest participants. Little Albert, however, anonymous or not, definitely paid a high price that later subjects will never have to pay. Thanks for listening.